Hello, and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name is Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On today's show, I'm going to be talking about something that happened this past week about an article I wrote and a lot of the things that transpired from it and how I think there's some misunderstandings that are happening, or more so, some of the more concerning elements that came out of that online discussion. I'm going to kind of get to what brought me to this post and why I did it, its reception, and some very serious negativity that came out of it. First, I wanted to say this, as I always do. You know, if you've ever been, or if you've been with me since the beginning, or this is your first time listening in, I do appreciate you being here. I appreciate your support, your messages, all of your shares, the way you've shown up for these conversations. It really means a lot more to me than I can say, especially recently. Just hit 5,000 followers on Fetlife. I'm really appreciative of that, because without all of you here tuning in, giving me your questions, asking me these deeper thoughts, this wouldn't have gotten to this point. If you've really been getting something on the show, please take a moment to like, subscribe, rate my show, especially if you're on Spotify. All you have to do is click those little 3 dots on the app on your phone, leave a review. It helps my show keep growing and make sure these discussions reach the people who really do need to hear them. And also, as I always say, there is a donation link on the show notes. If you want to help support what I'm doing here, these episodes take time for me, a lot of care, a whole lot of behind the scenes work. Any support directly goes into keeping this space alive and thriving. All right, let me get into this today. First, I really do want to take a step into something heavier, because it's been coming up a lot lately, especially in my work, in my practice, and then, unfortunately, inside of the scene. What I'm talking about today is coercion and boundaries and consent. Now, these are words we use a lot in our spaces, sometimes too casually, sometimes too vaguely. But they aren't interchangeable, and they carry a lot of weight. They define the line between safe and ethical play and the dynamics that become manipulative or even harmful. And here's the thing. Consent isn't this vague vibe or this passive yes. It's informed, it's ongoing, and it's given without fear or pressure or emotional leverage. And most importantly, it can be revoked at any time. Now, I've listened to the arguments. There was some DOMs a while ago that's saying, submissives, if they say no, they're not really doing this. No, we still have autonomy, right? I'm not going to go tell my sub to chop off their finger because I want to watch them in pain. That's no, right? But that part really does matter, that we have to do these things freely, because some people will try to twist, oh, you agreed once, into you don't get to change your mind. And that's not how this shit works, all right? It's not in sex, not in kink, not anywhere. You're going to hear me a little bit more in passion today, because this episode, last week, what happened, it took a lot of my emotional bandwidth. By, Thursday last week, I think I was out of spoons for a lot of things. I just couldn't get it. And to the point that I had to shut the discussion down. And for those who know me, I don't do that often, but it did get quickly out of hand. We're going to get into that, right? Now, lately, as I've been watching some people, really some of the loudest ones in the room, they started bending these words to defend their fear-based obedience. And let me be clear, they're justifying manipulation here, and they're dismissing people speaking up about their experiences. That's not something I'm going to stay quiet about. And it was a lot. So today we're going to really we're not going to get into this whole lot of talk theory here. We're going to talk about how these things show up in practice, in dynamics, relationships, in the way power exchange is used or exploited, because this is exactly where it matters. And if you've ever been placed in a space where your voice was shut down, where pressure was replaced with consent, right, or where your role, whether you're a dom or sub, was used as leverage against your autonomy, well, this episode's going to be for you. So first, I think we really need to start understanding. I think a lot of people talk about consent all the time. As a matter of fact, next week I'll be at an event where I'm going to be talking about consent again. But we need some definitions for clarity, all right? So before I go any deeper, I'm going to take a couple of minutes here to actually start defining these specific terms. Because if we're going to talk about harm, about the misuse of power, or about what gets called kink, but really isn't, we need to be clear on what we're talking about first. So let's start with consent, right? We hear about this, I don't know, there's probably 30, 40, 50 writings per week on it, right? Now, consent is not a one-time permission slip. It's not a checkbox. It's not something you give and lose the right to revisit. Real consent is informed, it's enthusiastic, and here's the best part of that all, it's revocable. And that means the person understands that what they're agreeing to, they genuinely want. They can change their mind at any time. There's no guilt, there's no punishment, right? There's no cold shoulder afterwards. And from a psychological standpoint, consent has to come from a place of agency. The brain needs to feel safe enough to evaluate the options and not just react. And when someone's limbic system, your whole nervous system is in fight or flight, freeze or fawn or flop, their ability to freely choose goes right out the window. That's not kink, guys. That's conditioning. All right? Now we're going to talk about some boundaries. Boundaries are your internal sense of what's okay and what's not. They're not walls. They're not about control. They're not up for debate. You have internal boundaries like how much emotional closeness you're comfortable with, and external ones like the limits around touch or tone or topics that are off limits, right? It's this little circle you draw around yourself that says, this is what I'm comfortable with and that's what I'm not. Now, healthy dynamics here respect these boundaries. They don't just work around them or wait for the right moment to start testing them. And here's something a lot of people get wrong. Setting a boundary is not the same as issuing a challenge. It's not a dare. It's not an invitation for you to be pushed. It's a statement of self. And when someone sees your boundary and starts angling around it, making you feel like you're difficult or uncommitted or somehow not submissive enough or not dominant enough, what they're doing is laying the groundwork for the big one, coercion. And that's going to bring me to this word. Now, coercion is not the same thing as asking. It's not negotiation. It's not dominance. It's not submission. Coercion is pressure. It's manipulation. And it's when fear replaces your choice. It can look like guilt tripping. It can sound like silence after you speak up. It can feel like being emotionally cornered. You might still, maybe you're going to say yes, but is it a yes that's rooted in fear of losing that connection? Connection, if it's done that way, that's not desire. And psychologically, coercion traps us, it taps into this part of the brain's survival mechanism. If someone has a history of people-pleasing, abandonment trauma, or has been punished in the past for saying no, coercion doesn't even have to be obvious. The nervous system remembers. If somebody's pushing you right at the edge of that discomfort, claiming it's all part of the scene, that's not power exchange. That's exploitation, right? And hopefully now we're a little bit clearer on what these words actually mean. They're not up for debate, guys, in the Midwest or in Brazil, right? Oh, you didn't think I can get around mentioning who you are. Don't worry, I will. We can start to look how they get misused because the harm isn't just in what's being done. It's how it's justified, right? And that's where this conversation is going to start to get real. So where do these lines get blurred? Well, that's because they're on purpose. Now that we kind of understand a little bit more, and quite a few of us should understand these concepts anyways, about consent and boundaries and coercion, what they actually are, let's talk about where these lines start to really blur and we lose sight of these things. And I want to be really clear here that blurring often isn't an accident. It's not, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't think about that, right? It's not some fucking excuse. I'm going to be cussing today because I'm a little fired up, and this is actually making me go through everything I was subjected to last week, right, to deal with this, right? But them doing this, it's intentional. It's used as cover, and it happens in all directions. I've seen submissives weaponize guilt to get what they want. I've seen dominants use authority to silence concerns. No role is immune to this, right? And one of the ways coercion slips in is by being dressed up as authority or intensity. And you're going to hear people say, well, a real dom pushes their submissive, or, it's natural to feel fear if you're being challenged. It's part of the experience. Yeah, if you agreed to it. If you've discussed it, you consented to it, right? And sure, consensual challenge can be part of DS, but there's a difference between agreed upon intensity and emotional manipulation, between structure and control. And let me just tap into why this all started. Last week, I wrote about when DS is about coercion, not consent. And that was based off of an interaction of somebody I'm working with, and I'm not going to go into any details, but I wrote this post for them. And the post is still up. The comments are closed off. Now, for the most part, people started to identify and understand what I was talking about. The problem became that certain individuals, a couple in the Midwest, one from South America, started coming in and voicing, you've got to push sometimes. No, you don't. One was using a font so big that people on, the moon could have read it. When you come into my space, I'm typically respectful. If you've known me and if you've ever interacted with me, you know I will respect your autonomy. The moment you violate what I'm asking you not to do, we're not in discussion anymore. You're trying to assert authority over my space. So first guy got blocked who was, some older guy who everything about him is a walking contradiction. And you know what? God help anybody who gets involved with that person, because I don't think you're going to have any authority. I think you're going to lose all control to that person. The next person came in and basically said, you know what, I fear my subs into doing what I want because they need to be done. It needs to be done that way. And this was the biggest walking red flag. This happened to be a guy he claims he's from, Brazil or somewhere in South America. He probably doesn't. Honestly, I'm not going to take too many cheap shots at you, but frankly, you were an idiot. And the fact that you devolved the conversation to the point that you're throwing out disgusting accusations. You won't be able to read them because I ended up blocking the individual. But it got really debasing. It wasn't worth me engaging. He got reported, he got blocked off my page. But again, another individual that, saying what they're doing, and this writing became a mirror. And it shined a light on their behavior, and they didn't like it. And they're trying to justify, they felt the need to justify what they're doing in their own dynamics privately, and they basically outed themselves. And the third guy that came in did the same thing. The only difference being is that he didn't recognize that while he was talking to somebody, that person read his comments and subsequently probably missed out on something because they terminated it. At least that's the way I understand it. Don't really know. But they felt, after reading that person's comments about how they use pushing as a technique to override someone's fears, that was okay. It's not. It's all coercion. Everything. They don't even really understand what coercion means. It means you're taking somebody's choice through manipulation. There is no. You can't dress that up, right? You can't wrap cow shit in tin foil and sell it to me as earrings, because that's not what you're doing. That's what they're attempting to do, and I just caught them. But anyways, I don't stray too far. You have a little bit more background on how and where this all came from, all right? But I really want to say this again to drive this home. Structure is something you build together. Control is something that someone imposes. In a healthy dynamic, pushing limits happens with negotiation, check-ins, mutual understanding. Both people know what's being tested and why and how they agreed to it. There's safety on both sides of the exchange. When that's missing, when one person starts using the role to override someone's hesitance, right, or they respond with a no, with silence or withdrawal, that's not intensity. That's coercion hiding under protocol. I've seen this time and time again. And it doesn't always come with shouting or direct commands. Sometimes it's really subtle. Sometimes it looks like emotional dependency. The kind that says, if you don't do this, I'll be disappointed. If you really trusted me, you'd let me do this. That kind of language chips away at someone's sense of agency. It's really dangerous in dynamics where emotional connection is strong, because once love or belonging gets tied into obedience, it's not about it being in a dynamic. It's a pressure cooker. Right? And this particular person, when this guy, I was arguing that fear and pressure don't necessarily mean abuse, especially if there was someone, if some consent was given, some being, I don't know, yeah, I agreed to a scene. Well, that's consent for the scene. That's one time. right? That thinking is reckless. It assumes if you've got a yes once, it covers everything you do afterwards. That consent doesn't have to be rechecked, or that discomfort just means you're doing kink the hardcore way. And these people are out there, and all this tells me, that you don't understand what you're doing, that you're dangerous and shouldn't be in the community. Because what they're doing, it completely ignores the fact that consent given under fear or duress is not consent. If you don't seem to understand that concept, you shouldn't be in the lifestyle. Period. It reinforces this harmful idea that being dominant means pushing someone until they break, or being submissive means learning to ignore your own fear. That's not power exchange. That's power being misused. And let's not pretend it's just confusion. A lot of people defending this know exactly what they're doing. They use roles and rules to avoid accountability. When someone speaks up, when someone says, hey, this didn't feel right, or I didn't know how to say no, they're told they just didn't understand the lifestyle. That's gaslighting. That's manipulation. Right? That's how harm gets minimized and repeated. And we see this play out time and time again. The countless writings, I see them all over social media. So if you've ever questioned when something felt off, but you were told it was normal, or that you weren't doing submission right, or you weren't leading properly enough, right? You weren't dominant enough, I want you to know that you're not alone, and your gut probably wasn't wrong here. And there is harm that this all causes. Because now I want to talk about the aftermath of all of this, because coercion, even when it's subtle, leaves a mark. And if you've experienced it, you know it's not just about what happened in the moment. It sticks around after, the questions, the confusion, the shame, the limbo. I've sat across from people in sessions, some submissive, some doms, who quietly said, I didn't know how to stop it. I thought this was power exchange, what power exchange meant. And what follows is often not anger, it's self-blame, guilt, doubt. They start asking themselves, did I overreact? Was I just not strong enough? And this is what happens when people with power, whether it's personal, positional, or emotional, downplay coercion. It teaches others to doubt their own instincts. It reinforces the idea that discomfort is just part of the game, that silence means consent, that fear isn't just part of the challenge, right? It's part of the challenge. And that's how internalized harm starts to take root. When someone feels they failed the dynamic by speaking up, or worse, that they broke the relationship by trying to set a limit, they stop trusting themselves. They stay quiet next time. When it happens, they don't say anything. They learn to swallow their fear, right? And the cost of that is tremendous. Because when that starts as a moment of confusion, it can turn into a long-term emotional shutdown. And for some people, the fallout is a complete loss of connection to their kink identity. They stop submitting, they walk away from dominance entirely, not because they lost interest, because it no longer feels safe. It's not just about kink either. The impact of all of this bleeds into their self-worth, their relationships in the future, their ability to say no, even know what they want. I've had clients tell me things like, I used to love my submission, but now I feel like I can't trust my body to tell me when something's off, or I still don't know if I agreed to that scene. I just went along with it. That uncertainty that these people have conveyed to me over the years eats away at a person, and it makes it harder to come back to the parts of kink that were once so affirming or joyful for them, right? So no, this isn't just about some misunderstanding, guy. It's not just about a communication issue, guy. It's harm. It's real harm. And it deserves to be named, not minimized, guy. Why am I saying that? Why is Chris emphasizing? So I'm speaking to these idiots that I doubt they'll listen. And a lot of people write and they hope they're never going to listen. But I want you all to know, all right, it got heated for me last week and a lot of things got said, and I even had some people that read that I work with that were, they were really upset by these people's comments to the point that they weren't blocking, that I had to check in with them to make sure they were okay. And people were like, oh, it's just words. It's not just words, because they're seeing the same actions that have been done to them, and it's triggering. The reality is, when we let coercion go unchecked, we don't just, we don't just damage the people in that dynamic. We damage the trust that's the entire lifestyle depends on. And rebuilding that trust internally and with others takes a lot of work, a whole hell of a lot. And this isn't just about a difference of opinion, by the way. I want to address this because this comes up in a conversation a lot, especially when things start getting heated, right? You start talking about coercion, about the harm, the misuse of power in kink spaces, and almost immediately someone throws out the usual line, well, that's just your opinion, Chris. I'm just going to use myself because it's easier for you all to understand. Or they try to draw this imaginary line between the lifestyle and quote-unquote therapists who just don't get it. All right, so let me clear that up right now. I'm not coming at this as someone looking in from the outside. I've been in the lifestyle for over 2 decades. I've lived it. I'm still involved in it, right? And I want to be clear, there's a reason why I separate my private life from my professional life, because that's my private life. And I don't want to interact with bigger communities than I'm already a part of because I need my private space. However, I'm currently have a mentor. I've guided people through it. I've worked with dominants. I've worked with submissives, switches, and everybody in between. This isn't about therapy versus kink. It's about refusing to excuse harm just because it happens inside a negotiated dynamic. And here's what I've noticed. When some people get called in or called out, they don't reflect, they lash out. They deflect, they belittle, they try to reframe the conversation as an attack, not because they're being misunderstood, but because they're being held accountable for once. And that challenges the comfort they've built around how they use that power, right? How they manipulate. But this isn't a debate. This isn't some abstract difference in philosophy. This is about recognizing when trust is being manipulated and when fear is being used as a tool. When someone silences someone else, right? When they're using someone's silence and they use that as their submission to them, right? Or getting them to do what they want, and manipulating that dominance. What gets missed in these defensive reactions is the heart of it. People are getting hurt, not because they're new or fragile or too sensitive, but because someone else crossed a line and convinced them this was normal. And the truth is, power and privilege exist inside of DS relationships. Dominants have power. Submissives often carry some emotional risk, and either role can be exploited if someone refuses to self-examine. If we can't ask ourselves how we're using that power and why, then you know what? You shouldn't be holding it. So no, guy, this isn't about preference. It's about whether you're, into TPE, high protocol, brat taming, service, or any other style of play. This is about ethical conduct. It's about real, informed, mutual consent. And if someone can't sit with that without getting defensive or name-calling, or worse, it might be time for them to take a long, honest look at why. And they won't, but they did out themselves. A couple of the comments I couldn't leave up, everybody, so you're not going to be able to read that discussion that happened last week because it was so inflammatory. And if it takes a toll on me, I ban and block people. But there is one comment you can find, and I did leave that one. But you'll still see what I mean. And by the way, let me clear this up because it's on social media and I don't have to necessarily name you. If people read that, that's on you. That's not on me. Let me reaffirm some truth here. I want to say a few things plainly. Your limits, they're not a burden. Your no doesn't make you disobedient, makes you human. Your no doesn't make you less authoritative or less dominant. And in any dynamic that's worth being in, that humanity should be honored, not tested. Kink isn't supposed to leave you afraid to speak. It's not meant to condition silence. At its best, the lifestyle gives you room to be fully seen, held, explore your desires and your own sensuality. in some ways the most of the world doesn't allow, right? But that only works when there's safety, and not just physical safety, but emotional safety too. And we need these spaces where people can name harm without being shouted down, where asking questions doesn't get you labeled as disloyal, where someone can say, something about that didn't sit right with me, and be met with care, not criticism, right? If you've been listening to this and you're feeling unsettled, if you're looking back at a dynamic or a scene or even a relationship and asking, was that okay? I want you to know it is okay to question it. It doesn't make you dramatic. It doesn't mean you're throwing someone under the bus. It means you're listening to yourself. And that's something I will always encourage, because reclaiming your voice isn't betrayal, it's clarity, it's care. And it's the first step towards kink that actually, guess what, honors you. You don't have to navigate that alone. Whether maybe you have a trusted friend, a professional, or even a private journal, your story deserves space. Your healing deserves time, and your instincts deserve respect. Now, I know today's episode might stir up some things, and if it does, I want you to know you're not broken, you're not crazy, your instincts matter. If you need support, I've got resources listed on my website. I have space. There is the NCSF. You can go there, find a kink-aware professional. Maybe just if you need to talk to someone, or maybe talk to a fellow dominant or submissive, anybody in your trusted circle, talk it out, right? Don't be afraid. Don't minimize yourself. Find someone to start having a discussion with, right? We all need support. We all need clarity. Okay? Now, I do want to talk about a couple of things coming up. Next week, next Tuesday, I'm going to be at an event around consent. I'm going to be talking that the event is called Consent as a Core Value, Practicing and Teaching Affirmative Consent. I'll be a guest educator and speaker there. This is being hosted by the OAP, _OAP. You can find that event on Fetlife. I think it's free to go to. I'm not really sure, but like I said, it starts in about 9 days, give or take. It's for an hour. Be myself and Obsidian Whiskey are going to be there talking about this. I'm very honored to be speaking at this. Again, consent is something we always have to talk about, so we have clarity around it, right? Because I've probably spoken 1,000 times on it, and maybe I'm embellishing that number a little bit, but the reality is there's a reason why we keep talking about it, and it matters, right? The next part is if you do have some more ideas for shows that you'd like me to talk about, because I've got others on deck. I've still got to talk to Red Warrior, a leather person out of the Midwest, right? Going to bring them on. Looking forward to that discussion. We're trying to hash out some details while they're going through and doing some things at events. They're super passionate about the lifestyle, leather community, and mental health. Been excited to talk to them for a long time. Got to coordinate. We're coordinating that now. My schedule, their schedule. There's a lot of coordination, guys. But I'm going to bring them on. I do have a book out. It's been out for a while. It's called Tangled Desires, the intersection between psychology and BDSM. Look, the book's a little repetitive. It's the first thing I've ever written. I have a great friend who's encouraging me to self-promote it. She's a wonderful person and is a great ear, and she's a wonderful colleague and friend and everything. So there it is. You can get my book anywhere you could download your ebooks, or there is a print version available. But yeah, it's not the greatest book out there, and I'm not saying it is, but it's not terrible. It's got a lot of good stuff in it for you. It took a lot of time to write it. So if you want to support that, grab it. I'm also on Substack. There's a link. A lot of my writings are there. If you want to support the work that I do there, that's great. There's all sorts of ways I keep giving out information. And for those who do forget, I have got kink worksheets on my website for free to download, right? There's 6 of them. From vetting to negotiations to other things, for check-ins for yourself. Those are all free, right? We've got about 3,500 downloads and counting now. People from all over the world are grabbing them. Please, if you need that type of stuff, go get it. It's there for free. I do it all for free, right? That's why I say if you want to donate to what I do, That's why, because I spend my time doing all this stuff for the community. I never ask, I never say you have to pay me for anything, but it helps me get this stuff done. I have another worksheet coming up here in about a month. I'll put another one out. But if there is something you want to hear me talk about, let me know. I'd like to keep this conversation going. I'm going to put the links to this on Fetlife. We can keep the conversation going there. I want to hear more about what we're talking about, right? All of these things. Anyway, until next time, everybody, be safe and stay kinky.